Hello, everybody. Pat McDonald here again for God Questions. I'm your host again tonight for video or session number 7 on God Questions. Tonight we're going to be again in the New Testament. I'm going to be reading out of Matthew, and these are questions by Jesus himself. And like I said in these previous classes, we gave a fuller explanation in our first introduction in the first video of the goal and the purpose to this class. But it's about God's questions to us. We always have questions for him, but are we aware that God is asking us questions? Hundreds of them in the Bible. And of course, his purpose is not the same as ours. We're seeking information. He doesn't need to seek any information. He knows everything. What he is seeking is to find out whether we are informed and whether we understand what his purposes are in our lives. So he asks these probing questions to get us thinking out of the box, get us out of our routine and to start thinking at greater levels and greater dimensions of what he is introducing into our lives. So let's dive into tonight's God question. Out of Matthew chapter 16, verse 26, in the New Living Translation, Jesus talking to his disciples, predominantly his 12, he says, "What do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul?" And then another question, very similar, is anything worth more than your soul? Let's get a little background on this. In Matthew 16, a chapter full of amazing revelation and information about our Lord and his ministry and his purposes. And it's where he first introduces the word ecclesia, the church. He discusses much about this, and we're going to dive right into that. Let's get a little background. Jesus' new headquarters, he no longer was really living in Nazareth. His kind of home base was now Capernaum, a city or a small city or a large town on the northern coast of the Sea of Galilee. And in this chapter, somewhere in around verse 13 or so, it says that Jesus took his disciples to Caesarea Philippi. It's about a 2 or 3 day walk north from the city of, or this town of, Capernaum. Caesarea Philippi was a Greek town or Greek city, and in it was a temple of Pan, the Greek mythological god, half goat, half man, and he was the god of the wild, the god of the forest, the god of the field, and by interpretation, the god of fertility. So you don't have to use a great deal of your imagination to figure out the kind of activity, sordid activity, I might note, not sorted, but sordid activity that occurred at the temple of Pan. This area of Israel is different than what most would consider Israel. It's actually green and lush to a large extent. Yes, still a lot of rock formation and whatnot, but it's the headwaters of the Jordan River, which flows into Galilee and then out of Galilee to the Dead Sea. And right here at this temple of Pan is literally where the water begins to flow out of this massive rock formation. You can go and Google and see a picture of this online. And there's this grotto. It's like a cave, but it's shallow. It's not terribly deep, but it's tall. It's probably 50 feet tall and 50 feet opening. And it's into this 75 or 100 foot tall, like volcanic wall. And the original temple was nestled into that cavern and then alongside of it. And today you can see the ruins of it, and you can see little carved out areas in the wall where they had statues, right? And in 2017, I had the privilege of accompanying several couples of Word of Life Fellowship with Bishop Tony Miller on one of these 9 or 10 day trips to Israel, and he took us there, and we were standing there with our back to this wall, to this grotto there in the ruins of the Temple of Pan. And Bishop says this is where Jesus brought his disciples. And in the backdrop of the cave, the cavern, and this temple. And Bishop says, Pat, this was the Las Vegas of Israel. Again, speaking of the sordid activity that occurred in this temple of the fertility god Pan. And he says it was in this place that Jesus declared the value, the purpose, and the founding of his ecclesia, the church. And he starts it out with this dialogue. He says in verse 15 to his disciples, "Who do the people say that I am?" Don't forget, Jesus did not need the information. He knew exactly who the people were saying he was, but he wanted the disciples to come up with the answer, to voice these answers. They said, some say you're John the Baptist raised from the dead. Others say you're Elijah come back down from heaven. Others think you are Jeremiah raised from the dead. Who do you think that I am? Was the next question. And Peter steps up in his famous declaration and he says, you are the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of the living God. I don't think Jesus was surprised. I believe that he knew all along what was going to be done and said. And he says, Peter, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father, our Father in heaven has revealed this to you. And he goes on to say, you are Peter, which means large rock, like a boulder. But upon this rock, another word for rock, similar, but this one is like a huge, like Gibraltar rock, like an island. You are the boulder, but upon this rock, and I believe he's referring to himself, Jesus referring to himself as the rock. Upon this rock I will build my ecclesia, my church. And the gates of hell, with this cave behind that, oh, by the way, coincidentally, by the locals, was literally called the gates of hell. The locals had a superstitious belief that this cave is where demons came and went to the underworld. So in the backdrop, Jesus says, the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. And then he begins to proclaim some fabulous and important points of authority. And whatsoever you, not just you, Peter, but you, the disciples, you, the ecclesia, the church, whatsoever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatsoever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And then he commands them not to say or tell anybody that he was the Messiah. Interesting. And then it says he goes on to explain and begin to predict to them what he was going to suffer at the hands of the Gentiles in Jerusalem, and how he was going to die and be raised again from the dead on the third day. Instead of listening, Peter, with his newfound authority, having been the man revealed with revelation from God, he pulls Jesus aside and starts to correct him. This is not going to happen to you, Jesus. And then Jesus said some really interesting points. He says, get away from me, Satan. Turn right to Peter, the guy he just was claiming, hearing from a revelation from God. Turns to him and says, get away from me, Satan. You are a dangerous trap to me. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view and not from God's point of view. And then Jesus starts on this important narrative to his disciples. He says, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways, and you must take up your cross and follow me. Don't forget where he's at. He's right there at the Temple of Pan, in the Las Vegas of Israel. And he's telling them they're going to have to be selfless, turn away from their selfish ways, take up their cross and follow me. In the middle of all this just abject self-centeredness and self-gratification going on. He says, if you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you try to give up your life, but if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And then he asks that pivotal question that we're posing tonight. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? My questions for you tonight. Obviously, he's not talking about have lost our soul like we are absent-minded and like, oh, I don't know what I did with it. I set it down. I can't remember where I put it. Yeah, this is not a question to the senile. So then my question for you is, what does it mean when Jesus says about losing our soul? Is he talking about losing our salvation? Or is he referring to our integrity, our morals, our core values? I want you to discuss that tonight. Is anything worth more than your soul? I know the answer. I know the answer I would give. I know the answer you're going to give. But my question, certainly to me, is do we live our lives as though our souls are indeed more valuable than anything else? Are they more valuable than the other things, particularly the stuff that the world has to offer? Our material possessions. Are our souls more valuable than our material possessions? Of course, we believe so. But is that the way we live our lives? Is that the way we make decisions? Is it more important than our houses, our cars, our stuff? Is our soul more important than success, financial stability, position, or power? Are we willing to compromise, fudge a little here on our integrity or our moral position or some core values? Nobody will notice. How about our ministry? How about our families? We understand the benefits of gaining, of having a good job. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with owning a car, owning a house. Nothing wrong with achieving debt freedom. But at what cost? So I leave with you again this question. What do we benefit if we gain the whole world but lose our own soul? Is anything worth more than our soul? So discuss this among yourselves tonight. And I want to hear the outcome. I'd love to hear what you guys have to think and have to say. I'll leave you with that. Thank you again for tuning in. Thank you again for being a part of this class. And we'll see you again next week for another one of God's questions. God bless.